So, future DLC. Some games live by it, many games die by it. In the modern era of fighting games, many developers and publishers have yet to really figure this out. For me, for what it's worth, I'm very hopeful that Bandai Namco knows what they're doing in terms of trying to make money, wanting to make money. They definitely do. And I figured I'd turn that hopefulness into positivity, kind of keep the train going today with making a DLC character wishlist video in the form of a tier list. Today, I'll be ranking characters from the 1,000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach in terms of how much I personally would like to see them introduced and made playable in Bleach Rebirth of Souls. I'll be ranking every character listed on the official 1,000-Year Blood War website, which is linked below. This will not be a video arguing for every character's probability for being added into the game, nor is this a ranking for how strong or viable I believe each character would be if they were to be included within Rebirth of Souls. Of course, assuming that they are faithfully translated. No, this is purely a personal hype list for my own entertainment, a DLC fantasy draft, if you would. Timestamps for each character will be included, so please feel free to skip around for your favorite characters. I'd love to read about your own thoughts on each of them, as well as your impression of the replacements, down in the comments below. Now, onto the rules for this list. Rule number 1. Decisions for character placements have been made primarily in terms of my own personal impression of each of them individually. Secondarily, in terms of how exciting I imagine their faithful representation within a competitively balanced version of Bleach Rebirth of Souls as a fighting game could be. Tertiarily, in terms of their actual performance within and relevance to the plot of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach. And then lastly, in terms of their actual tier list placement, relatively speaking. By relative tier list placement, I mean that S tier will include most hype picks overall, regardless of whether arguments or anecdotes, or regardless of whatever arguments or anecdotes for each character. For instance, if I say a character is a top pick in my discussion, but I include them in a tier lower than S, that's simply because there's something else that considerably detracts from their possible inclusion within the game, in my view, regardless of whether I discuss it or not. For this reason, first draft and final draft versions of this tier list will be featured in this video. Rule number 2. The tiers S through D and new skin only are ordered. So S, A, B, C, D, and new skin only are to be read left to right. Number 3, all other tiers are not ordered, so it doesn't matter where the character is. Number 4, S means that these are my top picks or personal wish lists, and I want them ASAP, as soon as possible. 5, besides S, personal favorite characters from this season of 1,000-Year Blood War are going to be in A. And this can be for various reasons. For example, Chojuro, his abilities finally got more spotlight, but he's still anime only. And yeah, spoilers for the 1,000-Year Blood War in this video. Full spoilers, don't watch this if you don't want to be spoiled. Which leads me to number 6. Chojuro's already dead. But so are Gin, Tosin, Ukiura, you get the point. Unalive characters are still valid picks. They can still be included within the game because they existed at some point and we still love them. Rule 7. For B tier means that these characters are either impossible to make within the game or have within the game, or they're unlikely due to character overlap, or both, but still desirable. I still think that some people, or maybe I could still want them within the game. Rule 8. For C tier, potentially meaningful additions. Again, I think these characters could be meaningful. For instance, character relationships or unique gameplay, but they're not personally things that I care for. B are things that I could still care for, I could say that, but C is not. D, rule number 9, D, there could be a myriad reasons why these characters don't make sense, or rather there are too many reasons why these characters don't make sense. For instance, I could really care less about them individually. They don't make sense in this fighting game per se, and that means like a 3D arena-based fighting game. There's not enough source material for them, period. They just don't do anything. They overlap too much with already existing or significantly more desirable characters. And yes, I am looking directly at you, Ishida Ryukin. Do something. And then rule number 10. New skin only. How do we interpret this? So new skin only means that these characters should probably just be alternate outfits or new skins. This is a concession that I'm making. I think that when combined with the new animations for Keycon moves, it simply makes more sense for these characters to be just alternate skins than wholly new additions to the roster. Even if I would love for that to be otherwise, for example, pre-trader versus post-trader Aizen, I think makes a lot of sense. And then you have to design a whole new moveset for pre-trader Aizen that doesn't include as many things as possible that post-trader Aizen does, which is why they probably just went the route of making him a skin with, I guess, costume changes in his moveset that don't really make sense timeline-wise. Another example would be Shunsui and Urahara in the base roster. They don't have their Bankais, but we do get to learn about their Bankais in TYBW. Shout out to BBW. I love Blaze Blue. So, starting off our tier list here in S tier, we have 1000 Year Blood War, Aizen. Yes, the one, the only Charisama is my top pick for all of Bleach Rebirth of Souls DLC, the one character I'd like to see introduced in the game as soon as possible. Now, admittedly, Aizen, he doesn't do much fighting in the 1000 Year Blood War, not in the traditional sense, at least. He has a small handful of combat encounters, but hardly any real screen time spent actually in battle, and even less so when you filter that down to time spent in battle with other individual characters, and by characters I mean sentient anthropomorphic beings or just things with free will. However, I believe that Aizen, 1000 Year Blood War Aizen still has considerable displays of power in this arc, or what most people refer to as feats, and at least one major battle at the very end of the manga with choreography that can be extrapolated from. I think similar to his existing base roster counterpart, 1000 Year Blood War Aizen, which I'm not sure if I'll keep calling it that, but I'll think of a name eventually that I like. This character can have infinite Reiatsu and work on kind of a different system mechanic in terms of energy management. He could be more melee focused than base roster Aizen and have inspiration for his moveset taken from his fight with Shuhabak at the end of the manga. He could play around with super armor just the same, but he could also, I think, be much more exciting and compelling for me personally, is if he plays much more around Kyosuke Suigetsu's illusions, even more so than base roster Aizen, maybe perhaps even exclusively. So this would be, instead of having his super armor through El Escudo, he could have maybe something akin to Shadow Clones from Naruto, where he can summon them mid-combo or using his signature move, and depending on the context in which you're using the move or at the time at which you're using the move during the combo, the clone can do different follow-ups to your attacks or just generally perform different actions to fake out the opponent, either taking hits for Aizen or baiting the opponent into strike throw mix-ups and things like that. And maybe even the more that Aizen can successfully execute with his illusion or clone combos or clone actions, he can have a meter that fills up. That's kind of like an aura farming gauge, quite literally. It's like the more that he kind of trips you up or mixes you up with his illusions, the more confident he gets in his abilities and the stronger that his attacks get. But that's just me. I think that would be really, really cool. Kind of a mix of, once again, Naruto from the Storm Arena Fighter series, and a bit of that, Itachi OG Super Clone Explosion and whatnot from beginning Ultimate Ninja and Ninja Storm. As well, I think that maybe one of his spiritual pressure moves could be Aizen summoning a clone of himself that performs certain advantageous actions, or this clone could simply wander towards the opponent and, psyching the opponent out. Once again, this is meant to be extremely versatile, and it's meant to play with the opponent's head, and more so than do damage or give Aizen advantages through other direct means, like, for instance, health or spiritual pressure gauge. Regardless, TYBW, shout out to BBW, I love Blaze Blue. Aizen's drip is just like immaculate. He's just one of my favorite designs in the whole latter arc of the series. And I think that this character could exist as an opportunity for the devs to get really creative and kind of craft their own OC, like their own original content fighter, essentially. If nothing else, it'd be a great chance to show Aizen's somewhat unique one-hit kill fighting style through other moments and unused assets from the source material. So that would be maybe his fight right before leaving Toeko Mundo in the Soul Society arc, more of his fighting abilities in base form versus the Gote 13 in Fate Karakura Town, and then again a bit more of that, well, the bare minimum of hand-to-hand combat that he does versus Juha back at the end of TYBW. The thinking here that I have is that the illusions that he shows Juha the choreography there, the things that he has fake Renji and fake Ichigo do versus Juha could be what he does in game in Rebirth of Souls. It's just that we obviously know that it's him, because otherwise how could you make it competitive if you know that don't attack the Renji, don't attack the Ichigo because you're fighting Aizen. That's the character that you saw on the character select screen or on the pre-battle screen. We're just going to have him do it using clones instead of other characters because it would be too obvious, and the idea of having clones is that you have to guess which one is the real body. And so I think that would be extremely, extremely fun for me personally. I can't think of other characters existing in fighting games right now that do similar things. I think something like that might be Hibiki from BlazBlue, who uses shadow clones to figure out the opponent, and just characters generally who either have illusions or clones and expect you. Once again, we've arrived at Happy Chaos. There you go. The last thing I'd like to say about Aizen is that I would love to see Hado number 99, the ultimate of the, I guess, non-Squad Zero Kidos, the ultimate Shinigami destructive art, Goryu Tenmetsu. I think it looks really, really cool on the manga. I really like the dragon-based Kido that we see happen in the TYBW. We see Ichibe do something with a dragon, and Aizen's the only other character that showcases this kinds of ability set, or I guess this level of the Hado ability set. And I just really want to know what that looks like animated. Kind of can't wait for TYBW anime to get there, although I'm definitely willing to, and I imagine it's going to look great regardless, so I'd love to see that in the game. Number 2 in S tier, we have Oetsu ni Maya, the number 1 Zanpakuto creator. So similar to Aizen, Oetsu is more pomp and circumstance, admittedly, than one would assume, and then I'd like to admit. Even with the anime-only editions, which I greatly appreciated and found riveting, Oetsu has more flash than substance. Still, I believe he has a very fun-looking slash and dash style, and is too fun of a personality and exceptional of a character design to pass down for a fighting game. I love to see the devs go wild with him, even more so than with Aizen, as long as they don't make him a puppet character, glorified zoner, or some other bogus archetype that really doesn't make sense for, again, his personality. I imagine I'd be happy to play any fighting game function with his name and likeness. And by that I do mean function. Oetsu can just kind of be one of those characters that just kind of takes up space. He fills in for a niche that isn't taken up yet in other characters, which at a 33 character base roster, I can't imagine that there's very many of that. But at the same time, he could be the kind of character that's intended to be overly simplistic or maybe excessively technical for players who really want more of a challenge. Personally, I'd like some kind of design that leans into the lethality of his fighting style and his nature. I know I've named Slash and Dash for a few characters in the past in a previous tier list, and I also mentioned that Aizen kind of had this fighting style, but Aizen's fighting style, or I guess offensive tactics, stem from his use of illusions, where he likes to attack opportunistically while his opponents are distracted. That makes it a lot easier for Aizen to go in for sure hit kills because his opponents are unsuspecting of when and where he's going to strike. So it's much easier to get critical hits or hits that are definitely going to incapacitate opponents. Oetsu is more lethal by the way of just being that fast and that strong to begin with. We see him completely dismantle and incapacitate the Schutzstaffel in one hit in the anime-only editions to the 1,000-Year Blood War, and it looks really cool. It kind of happens faster than we can see, really, so there's not much modeling and choreography to go off of there for the developers. But I truthfully, I think that with how Tamsoft and Bandai have cranked out so much unique content and baked it into this game for each of the characters that already exist, I believe that they're up to the task. They can make it happen. Again, cool dude. He kind of just feels like a fighting game character. Like, if you told me Oetsu, if you took off his Shinigami clothes and gave him some more, I guess, historically accurate clothes and put him in Samurai Showdown, I think he'd fit right in, right? He's just a dude, just a funny dude. And yeah, I like him a lot, and I really wish we could see more of his abilities more than anything. I don't need feats, I don't need accomplishments. I just want to know what Zanpakuto would the number one Zanpakuto creator have. Or I saw one comment on a YouTube video, or maybe it was a Reddit thread once, that was saying that maybe as the creator, his ability is to use any ability from any Zanpakuto he's ever created. That could be really interesting, a bit confusing, not necessarily what I want, but if he occupied the space of sort of a Mokujin character, honestly, that is pretty cool. You don't know what you get until you open the box. He could be the random select character in that way, kind of like Lunalu from Grand Blue Versus. Or once again, the devs can kind of cook up some original content saying that Sayafushi has X, Y, and Z abilities. Maybe ask Kubo directly for some inspiration, or just ask Kubo for some answers and say this is what's going to happen with this character, and then just make it happen. Again, I believe they can do it, and I'd love to see whatever happens. It'd be just the kind of thing that I'd be really excited and happy to get my hands on. Whether I main him or not, I'd just be really glad that he exists because he's a cool guy. And he's black. Fantasy draft pitch number 3. All right, weighing in at S tier, here's the pitch. An IRL sniper in a fighting game. And a 3D fighter at that. Now, I'm not a Strive player, but I'd gladly play the Happy Chaos Tax for a faithful rendition of Lily Barrow and his insane abilities. You have a sniper in base, kind of like Coyote Stark, but maybe, okay, hear me out, but maybe some literal aim-based or FPS-based gameplay where he has to actually track outspace and scope in the opponent for damage. Or he could be similar to Stark where he uses Ryotsu for damage, just kind of has a hit scan thing going on without using the scope. But he does that in base and then transforms into his angel form in Awakening, and then transforms into his other awakening, his other angel form in his reawakening, and just has completely, well, maybe 1 to 2, or no, he has 2 to 2.5 maybe disparate movesets. I think that sounds really exciting, right? He can be a zoner, a range zoner at the beginning, and then kind of play like a giant character, maybe like a Bankai Komamura or Renji in his second or third awakening. First or second awakening. And yeah, there's just lots of fertile soil there. There's abundance of potential with how to design him. You know, I think that in his second awakening with his, I don't remember his angel name, but he could kind of play like a Toho boss character where the opponent now has to play this bullet hell game and maybe just survive the time limit until maybe he reverts or maybe he runs out of steam. I don't know, but Lily Barrow is cool and also black. And I'm not aware of any characters in any fighting game who have a sniper rifle as their primary default weapon, much less one who regularly uses the rifle's scope as part of their canonical combat pattern. Lily Barrow could be the first, and if Rebirth of Souls endures the test of time as a competitive and competitively balanced fighting game, Lily Barrow could be one of the greatest snipers in all of fighting game history. On to Asnot. So Asnot could be a zoner like Byakuya, but with his range attacks, aka his nails, on an ammunition system. So maybe he's like Bang Chishigami from BlazBlue, where he sets them out, and if he uses them offensively, once they're out, they're gone, but he can also use them in more utilitarian or defensive ways, and once they're out, they stay on the screen semi-indefinitely. But in this ammunition system, he could also need to recall his nails before they can be used again. So Asnot's nails could even have a hitbox on return, staggering or damaging opponents. And as for his Shrift, the Fear, he could have unique interactions with system mechanics as a way of analogizing his canonical power of control over the enemy. This could take the form of doing substantial amounts of guard damage on opponent blocking under certain circumstances. aka chipping away at an opponent's mental or ability to continue doing battle, right? Literally wearing down on them over their fighting spirit or their willpower. Or, for instance, speaking of willpower, fighting spirit, or halting and maybe even reducing an opponent's fighting spirit gauge on hit when he enters his Vollständig in Awakening, right? You have him activate his Vollständig, he kind of transforms into that fearful god state, and what he could do uniquely among the roster, among the cast Rebirth of Souls, is literally take away your fighting spirit gauge on hit. And now this would be restricted to combos, or maybe only restricted to even a spiritual pressure move. Maybe on hit, there's no way to balance that so he's not taking away too much. I'm personally of the opinion that kind of all of the meters in the game are too slow right now. Like everything could charge a bit faster. The game, there's nothing wrong with having 5-minute rounds. I'm not against that at all. But the speed at which interactions happen, the frequency at which they happen, is a bit too slow for my taste. I don't think that there's much of there are compelling enough reasons that sometimes the best thing to do in the game is to wait or not take offensive actions. I think if sometimes the best behavior or the best game plan you can take is to have defensive behaviors by way of not defending against your opponent, but literally not interacting with them, that is not the most exciting version of a game that you could have for a fighting game. If this were a different kind of game, maybe like a turn-based game, or a card game or whatever, that'd be different. But anyway, back to Asnot. Asnot could chip away, steal, do something with the fighting spirit gauge. And by fighting spirit gauge, I do mean awakening, sublimation, spirit drive, and whatnot, so that he's stealing that when he's hitting you. And that, I think, would really work with his Shrift, his Quincy ability. Whatever the case, I imagine Asnot as a very technical zoner, and I'm already excited to imagine him as the kind who's strongest when he's high on resources, but excessively vulnerable when not. Perhaps similar to Guilty Gear Strive's Asuka R. Kreutz. Again, very, very technical character. Maybe Asnot doesn't need to be as technical, and I don't think any character in Rebirth of Souls kind of hits that milestone. But who knows? Who knows how exciting that could be? If that were to happen, I would definitely be a fan. Because for me, the challenge is being able to drive the car more so than it is winning and beating your opponents. That's hype. Coming in at number 5, we have True Bankai Renji. Now, 1000-Year Blood War Renji could be nearly identical to base roster Renji, but I wouldn't want him to be, and I think the devs are much smarter than that. See, this character has a lot of potential. Base roster Renji plays like a keep away and chip damage character. He wants to keep you at bay at the mid to long range, chipping you away until you get in close, and then when you're in close, he wants to use plus frames to bait you into mashing once he's done with his attacks, so I can get you with counter hits, and then wear away at you again, knock you away, rinse and repeat the process. 1000-Year Blood War Renji could play much more in your face and aggressive instead, leaning more into chip damage as a strength for damage, meaning he could do more damage on block than he would with actual hits depending on the move. Leaning more into chip damage than zoning and keep away. I also suspect that this Renji would have some interesting aspects of command grabs and strike throw mix-ups baked into his kit, owing to his newly acquired arm when in Bankai, with the overall idea for his game plan being to overwhelm the opponent with a continuous stream of looping, if unsafe, options on block. So the thing with current base roster Renji is that a lot of his things are unsafe at range, but some of these things are designed to be safe to, again, make opponents mash. This other Renji wants to just kind of go monkey mode, go ape shit. 1000-Year Blood War Renji wants to go monkey mode, and he wants to kind of choke you out of options, choke you out of brain space, so that, oh, is he going to throw me now? Or is he going to continue chipping away at my guard gauge? And maybe he can function really interestingly around the guard gauge, where some things he does are better when the opponent has meter, and some things are better when the opponent is guard broken. I think that if you could have big arm Renji have short to medium range attacks, and maybe have a stance like Byakuya where you can switch between them, that would be really exciting. And if you could have it such that his strengths are also different outside of range, in that, for instance, he's really, really good at strike throw in the arm or long, medium to long range mode, but then he's really, really good at chip damage when he's in the short range, that could be very exciting. But yeah, give Renji players more love, because he's like one of the main characters in the show, or, you know, secondary, tertiary protagonists. And I think that character deserves more love in general. And he just kind of has a cool moveset overall. He gets a lot of character development, and I think he deserves an extra spot on the roster if Ichigo is going to have multiple as well. Number 6, Kilge or Kilge OP. He stills your spiritual pressure gauge. Send tweet. So Marilyn Manson really showed up and showed out in the TYBW anime adaptation. He gets thorough screen time in the manga, but the anime drew things out even further and really gave his character some love. Due to this, the Rebirth of Souls devs should have an abundance of animations and moves to draw inspiration from, and what better character than the best slavery user, Sklavre, in all of the Sternritter, to fashion a Ryatsu thief after. You know, since they'll probably never had Yumichika. Yeah, I'm still hurt about that one. Fantasy Draft pick number 7, Sasakibe Chojuro. I just want to see more of this man. I don't want to see him like just go ham. I want to see him do things so bad. He's so low-key hyped in the manga in terms of his feats, and obviously enough so to warrant a tiny bit of bonus material in the anime, where we not only are reminded of him being the cause for Yamaji's forehead scar, but finally explicitly shown as much, shown him actually doing this in an anime-only flashback. Canonically speaking, Chojuro has the only lightning-based Zanpakuto as well. We're not exactly sure about Yoruichi in terms of well, I actually haven't read the novels myself, but they aren't written by Kubo, so that's why I say canonically speaking. I don't know what Yoruichi Zanpakuto does, and it's not confirmed whether or not she is a lightning user or if that's just Aikido. But Chojuro has the only lightning one, and he's a standout not only in terms of his individual capabilities, but also Bleach's magic system, you know? We don't know if his Zanpakuto ability is simply to conjure and control lightning, like Yamamoto with fire or Hitsugaya with ice, or some more conceptual phenomenon that's merely achieved through lightning, like Shinji's hypnosis being activated through Sakanade's scent or fumes. But we do know that whatever Chojuro does, it enabled him to be the first division's lieutenant for hundreds of years, possibly mid-captain level, maybe even stronger by the time that he died. And when I think of Chojuro as a roster candidate amongst a sea of unique fighters in Rebirth of Souls, I picture a fencer who dashes swiftly, he parries often, and he shoots piercing lightning from his blade. And he plays very opportunistically, sort of like Ulquiorra, where he's reserved, or never overexerting or overextending himself. But again, he's a fencer, and so he's going to take opportunities as they come and take a mile out of an inch. He's a veteran swordsman. And yeah, give this man time to shine, because obviously we're never going to get that otherwise. So post-mortem, put him in the game. Just put him in the bag. Senjumaru. Now hear me out. Ranged Noitora. No. Okay. So with 6 mechanical arms and a penchant for wielding a needle and thread, Senjumaru stands out poised to potentially be one of the most unique fighters in Rebirth of Souls. I know I've said that a lot here, but she's literally just different. She doesn't fight the same. In the TYBW anime, we witnessed her attacking foes directly with the point of her needle, using the thread to confound and restrict enemies, and combining both to generate woven constructs with virtually no limitations to their uses. Obviously, Senjumaru's versatile toolkit would lend themselves greatly to playable character designs, where the devs can take her in any direction they'd like within the boundaries of, reason or suspension of disbelief. Personally, I see Senjimaro operating as a trap setter and like a mid-range zoner, kind of like Kokonoe or Cagliostro. Kokonoe from BlazBlue and Cagliostro from Grand Blue Versus. She leverages hazards that she sets upon the field, and she has superior range when she wants to play keep away, but also complex Okizeme setups and block strings to mangle opponents with once she's properly set up. I'm not a Cagliostro player, but I was a Kokonoe player in Chrono Phantasma. Who can say that they weren't, obviously. And I think that when done correctly, tuned correctly, that this kind of like trap zoner archetype can be like deceptively fun to play as and against. And Senjimaro can be that girl. Also, I mentioned drip for other characters like Oetsu and Aizen, and Senjimaro's definitely got that going on for her as well. Number 9, Mask de Masculine. So in my opinion, Rebirth of Souls doesn't have a dedicated grappler. We have characters whose whole offensive game plan is cycling through strike throw options, but none who aspire to, in a traditionalist sense, put the fear of God in you through absurd levels of mental pressure at close range, and who fundamentally achieve the bulk of their damage through command grabs and other unblockable options, rather than hit stun button combos. Mask could occupy this niche while also bringing a healthy bit of comedy, fun, and goofiness to the game, with his constant Deadpool-esque self-aggrandizement and his repeated fourth wall breaking appeals to the audience. A character like Gerard Valkyrie could probably also accomplish this, but he wouldn't be as obvious or funny. Grapplers are oftentimes made to joke characters. I don't think this needs to be the case. I think that Mask could be like 3.5D, like not exactly fourth wall breaking, where he's literally constantly talking to the players of the audience, but where he kind of like in the anime, he exists in his own world and he really believes his own hype. Maybe he doesn't actually believe that there are constantly people watching him or cheering him on, but he operates on this level, whereas if he might as well be delusional in believing that there are people constantly watching him and cheering him on. And so his appeals to the player are just kinds of like interfaces or intersections between his overtly theatrical personality and, again, the perception of the players looking at him through the screen. I think that Bleach does a really good job at diversifying its personality types amongst characters and even amongst like plot and character arcs within the story, so that they're never too heavy or too serious or too lopsided. But currently we don't have that in Rebirth of Souls, and I think that's perfectly fine. Rebirth of Souls could still remain the overall serious fighting game, or fighting game with a very serious tone. It doesn't need a gag character. But if I were to ask you, is Ladiva from Grand Blue a gag character? I imagine most people would say no. I think she's amazing and very, very fun. And yeah, it's kind of distracting sometimes to have a character do a super where, we're shown things that couldn't possibly be happening. Like, does Ladiva have the power to transfer her opponents into a ring where she's suddenly doing, WWE Superstar SmackDown vs. Raw maneuvers against them, and she's just bringing in a referee to count down against her opponent on chokeholds and things like that? Like, obviously not. That's not a part of her canonical power system. But, like, it might as well be if, she's the one fighting her opponent. That's where she would fight her opponent, or where she would choose to fight her opponents. And that is the manner in which she is fighting them when she's engaging them, even if it's only in her head. So I think that makes sense for this kind of character. And, it doesn't have to be for everyone. I think that Mask is a fun character in Bleach, and I don't know how popular he is. I don't really necessarily care for him very much, but like, I think having grapplers in fighting games as another option or another dimension of player expression is really fun. And so far we mostly have rushdown and zoners. And again, I don't think we have any characters whose whole moveset is, gotcha blocking, or oh, Kachi mashing, or hopefully not ever looping throws from Street Fighter 6. But I digress. Number 10, Jugram Hashuvaltu. Really not sure about the most obvious playstyle for this guy, but I just really like him. I just think he's neat. He carries himself with a lot of dignity, but he isn't openly condescending like a lot of Bleach's other antagonists. And he's one of the only characters in the verse that fights with a shield. I wouldn't design him, however, around super armor if I were a Birth of Souls dev, since Kenny and Noitera they already have those functions covered. And in a way, Aizen too, albeit to a lesser extent. But that also speaks to my point of personality types and primary antagonists. Aizen is rather condescending, at least when you compare him to Hashvalth. Again, Hashvalth is just cool to me. He's a villain who starts off with long hair, very effeminate features. He's an antagonist, but also not. He's very rational, very reasonable. In some ways, very emotional, but also very guarded and secretive about his emotions. And he has a lot of humanity given to him gradually, drip fed to us, surrounding him throughout the narrative. And I think that I imagine that a lot of people find him compelling. I do. He's not like a fan favorite for me, but I think that without his character, TYBW wouldn't be as engrossing of an arc. Maybe it would be too heavy and too serious. Not that he's full of levity. But anyway, I'm not sure I'd base this kit around parries and counters either, since I feel that too many characters in the game have that as significant portions of their kit and game plans, especially where it doesn't make sense. Like, yeah, Gin likes to fake out opponents, but does he have to have, like, his greatest potential damage gated behind successfully executing a parry and then only having a time limit to do attacks after getting that parry? I think it would be better if Gin had something like Ichigo's Getsugo aura, where after he gets the parry, he gets to have buffed attacks for a certain amount of attacks as opposed to literal time. But again, I digress. Perhaps Jugram could function as a disruptor in a more metaphysical sense, where his unique trait or abilities could interact with Rebirth of Souls system mechanics directly. As the balance, that being his Shrift in TYBW as a Quincy, perhaps he can steal health on hit when he has lower Konpaku than the enemy. Or perhaps in Awakening, he can gain increased amounts of spiritual pressure gauge upon taking damage, and provided he does get a counter or parry as a spiritual pressure move, that extra meter would net more potential counters in the future, creating a defensive feedback loop. So we have a turtle character. Best defense in the game? Start calling for nerfs now? Probably. Don't ask me about what to do with his almighty, though I can't see the future. Yes, he should have an Awakening, probably, but how would it distinguish itself from Juhabox? Not really sure. Coming in at number 11, the last of my top tier picks. I guess this would have to be the third DLC, because you have 12 in total. Kenpachi Zaraki. Who wouldn't like more Zaraki? Right? So more Zaraki, but now he'd have more reach due to his enlarged Shikai, right? We have that axe cleaver thing going on. And personally, I'd make him less defensively oriented than his base roster counterpart, and more of a guard destroying plus frame having monster. But that's just me. I want him to be even more offensive and maybe even slightly faster than his base roster counterpart, where he's really about ripping and tearing into the opponent as opposed to playing around with the turn-taking aspects of his persona. Having a distinct character slot for TYBW Kenny helps us make more of an argument for the inclusion of Nozurashi's Bankai, instead of base roster Kenny having a skin that's just his TYBW clothing, and then a Shikai skin on top of his sword, and then just recoloring his skin when he gets into Awakening. I'm most crazy for him actually being a separate character, because again, you have room for a slightly different moveset, maybe more range and speed, more attack and less defense. But let's just take his offensive rating and turn that up to a 5 or maybe even a 6, have it be off the charts, and let that defense fall to a 0. This character is going to be like just bleeding health on both sides of the field. Awakened 1000-year War Kenpachi? No. This is more like Awakened Koichi Stark on steroids. We're trading our own Konpaku for big damage and guard breaks, and we are worrying about the consequences later. That's TYBW Zaraki, and I'm a thinking man's kind of player. I like, I like to play very technical players that like to play for the long haul, like Gin and things like that. But sometimes you want to just turn your brain off and have fun, right? And there you go. Bunga bunga. Before I move on to B and C tier, let's talk about my undecided picks. So beginning with Yumi Chika, I think that Yumi Chika has probably enough assets from the source material, aka enough fights and feats and things of that nature, to warrant, or I guess to justify creating a fighting game character out of him. Like, he has enough material. But I imagine that when it comes down to a character who's probably only as popular as he is, meaning not one of the most popular characters, probably a mid-tier popularity character if I had to guess, although he's one of my favorite characters. I think it comes down to an opportunity cost of, do we make him and do we do a good job at making a faithful representation of this character that is also probably hopefully competitively viable in a fighting game, or do we reserve that manpower and those man hours for a much more popular character who will probably see a lot more playtime and a lot more appreciation from the fan base? That's what I think is the case for characters like Yumi Chika, and also what surprised me about Ikaku Madarame. I think Ikaku is cool and probably is equally as popular, if not more, than Yumi Chika, just because of him having more of a central presence in the early plot of the story. But I imagine it was probably an either or for the two of not either or, because Yumi Chika does not fight Ichigo, but it ends up getting down to an either or once you get to characters who are only as popular as he is. Okay, so then I will say the same for Rojiro, the Visored, the conductor character, the guy with the whip, if you're not familiar. I'll show him on screen, of course. Whereas he's cool, he's unique, he would be like a long to mid-range character, maybe not a zoner, maybe a kind of a command grab, trap, or something of our other character similar to 1000-year Blood or Renji that I talked about before. But again, not popular enough, probably. And the same probably goes for Ukitake and the 100s Espada, the X-Espadas, Dardoni, Siruchi, Lupi, and Charlotte. I think Charlotte is really cool. I would love to see Charlotte, but again, would I ask for Charlotte over a B-tier pick or an A-tier pick like, sorry, not an A-tier pick. Would I pick Charlotte over Basby or Kinsei? Definitely not. Would I pick Kinsei over Rojiro? Probably. But Bankai Rukia over Rojiro? Definitely. So that gets to a point where we're kind of just like splitting hairs, and it's not nice, but you have to realize that unless they intend to put all of their money and manpower behind the game, they're going to have to make decisions where they're excluding certain representations, just for the sake of, we don't have all infinite developers and artists and talent in the world, and we have to move on to the next DLC pack that's going to sell, or the next game, right? Maybe in the next game, I think we can see a lot more of undecided tier and maybe even new skin only tier. But just to finish off here with my undecided tier, we have Pernita. I just don't think Pernita is viable in the context of a competitive fight. Maybe that's just a failure of my own imagination. I think he awakens and he turns into the giant hand, and then you're doing a boss fight. But unlike Renji and Komamura, when does that boss fight stop? He doesn't have any kind of stipulation in the anime where he gets tired and has to revert to a previous form, so I don't think that just makes sense. And something similar goes for Gerard Valkyrie, where it's like he's just going to be giant once he's giant. How do you make that a fair fight in a competitive fighting game? They definitely have shown, I think, in Rebirth of Souls that they either don't know how to do that, or that their answer or compromise is to have it be on a time limit. And I don't think that's the most compelling for fans of those characters, because that's not what happens in the canon. And I also don't think it's the most engaging in terms of what could be possible in the game. because you could have it such that Komamura, who has mastered his Bankai and doesn't really have a time limit in the canon, he kind of just stays that way, and then you have to engage with him in a different way. Maybe instead of having spiritual pressure, he has a stamina meter, where after doing so many things, he gets really tired. Maybe after taking so much damage, he reverts and then has to go Bankai again. I thought that's what they would do with Komamura, but obviously they decided to do the time limit thing because they decided also to make the Bankai itself kind of overpowered, like very overpowered, such that you kind of have to just survive and oftentimes find yourself in a checkmate situation because his offense is so overwhelmingly strong such that the only options are to defend. You can't counter his offense. So that's what I think is the case with Gerard, Pernita, and their ilk. And then, of course, we have Yoriuchi's little brother, a really cool character, black character as well. We don't really see that much about him anyway. There's not really much material. So I don't know where to put him in terms of how much I want him as a character. I think it'd be really cool to have a Yoriuchi type character who has, I don't know, something different going on, maybe some different flavor of Shunpo and Kido based fighting, but ultimately that is just another Yoriuchi. And then we have James. So I'm wondering, like, should Mask of Masculine be a standalone character where he's just a grappler and just does grappler things, and maybe James is just like on the sidelines? Or would Mask of Masculine be more distinguishable or more distinguished amongst the cast as a puppet character, where you're actually playing James who's controlling Mask, and maybe, you know, you can input commands that amount to command grabs and a grappler moveset, but ultimately maybe it's kind of like a Carl and Relius Clover situation in BlazBlue, where the doll has health, and once the doll's health is depleted, the master or the puppet master is vulnerable, very, very vulnerable. Of course, I can't forget about Orihime and Bankai, or Thousand Year Blood War Yamamoto. To begin with, Orihime, I think that she's just not going to end up included in the game at all. And here's my reasoning for that. The first thing is that Orihime is not a fighter. It's not, well, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and reread the manga or whatnot. I think it's the case that her character, that she detests fighting, and I think it just kind of be this dissonance, this narrative dissonance, to have this character who really hates fighting be a fighter when you're trying to make this game competitively viable. Like, how do you make a character who has strengths and the kind of strength that she has, you know, healing and absolute defense and things like that, but also plays to the strengths of the character in an honest and faithful way, where you have this character who has never been in the front lines and has never had that, or doesn't have very many feats offensively speaking. How do you make that competitively balanced, where, you know, if she has an absolute shield, absolute defense, if she can heal anything, how do you take that to a character that isn't overpowered while also making it fun to play and compelling to play against, while also properly translating the personality of, I don't even want to be here? I think that's a conundrum for the developers, and something that they probably will ultimately decide just not to undertake. I think it makes the most sense for a character to just not be playable, and although that's probably letting down a lot of people, I'm actually let down by it because I think she's really cool, and I think that it's really awesome to have more femme protagonists on the front lines, just generally in media, who are willing to fight and able to fight and are given the proper respect in when they do fight. I really just don't think it makes sense for a character. And then we have Thousand Year Blood War Yamamoto. So, base form, obviously Shikai. Awakened form, obviously Bankai. Or base form, Bankai in its initial phase, and then awakened form takes us throughout the different phases, north, east, west, south, or what have you, in whatever order they think makes the most sense. And then maybe, if needed, or if there's room for it, have a reawakening be his essential, I think, final form of his Bankai, where I think it's south? I don't remember what it is. But where he condenses all of the flames into his blade, and he essentially becomes a one-hit kill character, guaranteed. This would vary greatly from his base roster moveset, because his base roster moveset is essentially just Nagoriyuki, where you just have really, 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 really strong buttons, and they come at the expense of causing you to damage yourself. when you overuse them, which is kind of ironic, but it makes a lot of sense for maybe not necessarily Yamamoto's character directly, but how the plot characterizes him and how he operates within the plot of always going to such lengths, such as to experience blowbacks due to the drastic measures he chooses to undergo and the positions he puts himself in, necessitating him to undergo those drastic measures. So he's a bit of a tragic character in that way for many reasons other than just his own strength. But I think that it's definitely worthy of being its own character. But I could totally see and understand that in terms of selling DLC, selling units of the game, generating hype, that there might be too many, not very many, but too many characters above him in terms of these characters make more sense to put time and manpower into to create, especially if they're new characters, not repeated characters. I think the character that probably makes the most sense to be a repeated character is probably Renji, if I'm being honest, and then Thousand Year Blood War Aizen. And then that's when we start getting down to, well, do we do a repeat character that might be a fan favorite from before Thousand Year Blood War, or do we continue creating new characters, like for instance the Stern Ritter, the Schutzstaffel, and the Zero Guard, what have you. I think that, especially with what we've seen with the DLC leaks for number 1, they're probably going to go with like the main characters in terms of these characters affect the plot, or the plot centers on these characters' actions and pathways. And then maybe in DLC 2, we might get characters that are less important to the plot or just ancillary to influencing the plot. So I'm hoping that Yamamoto has space in maybe DLC 3 or so, because he is a fan favorite character obviously and has really cool abilities. But I think especially because he dies at the beginning of the arc, it's kind of like he gets his one moment in the sun, and it'd be really cool to see that reflected in a fighting game, or really cool to see that represented in a character that players can use creatively, because he gets to do a lot more than what he does in the game, at least again in the canon source material. But once again, is that worth putting him over someone else? I think if we were to get this game supported for 3 years, right? Maybe each season is half a year, and so therefore we get 8 DLC. 8 DLC means, wow, that would be a lot. 32 more characters. First of all, I think that's highly unlikely, because if they intended to push for the game that much from the get-go, then I think they would have launched the game in a much better state. But if they were even willing to pivot and change their minds now that they've seen a lot of feedback and generally positive reception, or maybe let me put appreciation for the game being released, if they're willing and able to pivot their resources to start supporting the game that much more, such that we're able to get 1 or more DLC a year, or just multiple years of DLC beyond this first year, I still don't think Yamamoto is going to beat out characters that, first of all, live longer and unfortunately have more lasting consequences in the narrative. But if it were up to me, I'd put him in DLC 3, definitely. Now I decided I'm going to explain B and C tier, and maybe a little bit of D tier just generally, before I explain new skin only last. Before that, let me explain not applicable. Not applicable, we have Ichigo, Juha, Unohana, and Ichibei. And the only thing I have to say about that is, if you know, you know. So moving on, we have Nell, Byakuya, and Rangiku. And what I'll say about that is, what would you change about Nell in terms of what she actually does and shows from her capabilities in TYBW that's significantly different from base roster, and significant enough to warrant a completely new character with different attacks, moves, spiritual pressure abilities, and Kikon animations? Same question for Byakuya, same question for Matsumoto. Matsumoto doesn't get a new ability, she doesn't get a Bankai. Byakuya was supposed to die, in my mind is dead, doesn't do anything different, not really worth it. And actually, because I explained that, let's go ahead and talk about new skin only. So when I say new skin only, this is essentially you have base roster Byakuya, right? And then you have TYBW skin. And the skin is just cosmetic. It just changes the way the character looks. Sometimes some more than others, like Matsumoto pretty much only gets a haircut. But Byakuya gets a whole new set of drip, including different hair, different clothing, different colors on some of his other clothing. He looks really nice, right? When I say new skin only, however, this is going to vary in a sliding scale of new cosmetics, like new models, new hair, new clothing, whatever, to that and more. And when I say and more, I'm looking for new Keycon animations, okay? So Byakuya's Bankai has essentially like 3 stages. It has the release stage, it has Senkei where it's funeral scene. Is that Senkei? Well, where he's surrounded by all the swords and he can, collapse them or like use one and go for the kill move. And then he has the shining white knight attack. And that's like the extent of like he's mastered his Bankai. And we see this with like more advanced captains and more advanced Bankais, that they have essentially not maybe more levels of power above initial released, but like different reflections of their powers, different gradations of how their power is expressed. For instance, with Yamamoto, it has the initial release where it's just, he's not holding back anymore. All his flames are out. All the heat is on. And then you have I think in that one, he's cloaking himself in his Ryatsu, and so we see it as flames. And then we have just different ways that this power of dominion over fire, or flame specifically, is expressed. And it has a Zenith ability or Zenith application where he condenses all of his power into his sword. And that's expected, that's understood to be the, maybe not the apex, but generally kind of the apex in terms of its usefulness of his power, because he doesn't have to work for what he wants to do very much at all once he gets there. You get hit with a blade, you're done. Game over, fight's over. So with new skin only, personally, I'm hoping that, and I don't know if Tamsoft or Bandai are thinking about this, but I really hope they are. I'm hoping that they have the foresight to see that new cosmetics doesn't have to only mean new cosmetics. So you're just changing the animations, you're changing the cutscene of the attack. I think that this could work for other characters. As you see here, I have number 1, Shunsui. Shunsui has his games, that's really it. I think if I were to make a different Shunsui, or TYDW or Captain Commander Shunsui, he would have different games. But in theory, you could have the same exact character as an alternate skin, where his Keycon move, maybe in Awakening, or maybe Spirit Drive, at least definitely Sublimation, he gets a new Keycon move instead of Zangaring, where it's him using his Bankai, or some phase of his Bankai. The same goes for Soifon. Soifon could fight exactly the same as a character. It doesn't have to be a separate character slot. But once she uses her Keycon moves, instead of using Bankai, but maybe instead of using her Bankai, she uses full, like, mastered Shunko. For Uryu, it would just be his trader form, where he has Quincy, Stern Ritter Quincy abilities, and he has his full-on Volstandic and other things. Again, we're only changing the cutscene that plays when this character does a Keycon move. Now, this is not what I want per se. This is an olive branch. This is me making extending an olive branch again. I understand that there's only limited manpower, limited funding for a game that obviously, to me, they didn't think was going to sell very much. They weren't putting a lot of money or bets on this game. Obviously, that is a mismatch for what the audience, at least here in the West, has wanted, here in the United States. But I can compromise as a consumer and say, if you all are willing to put a little bit more time and money into this, I will be content if you give me alternate skins, so that I'm not stuck playing beginning of Soul Society, beginning of the series Mayuri, where he gets one-shotted by Uryu. Like, I get it, we have different skins, but like, I want to still be able to feel like I'm doing the things that end of series Mayuri does.
I want to still be able to see myself do the things that end of series Shunsui does, because these are characters that I really, really like a lot. It's just something about the projection of fantasy, or just like the suspension of disbelief, where it's like, oh, like I am enamored with this character. My attachment to this character is based off of their growth and their matriculation. It's based off of how they evolved, both personality wise, but also in terms of their power fantasy, their abilities. And so I am enamored with Shunsui, not because he's old and he's strong and he's like a veteran, but because we see him grow into this really strong person who finally gets serious and then accomplishes things when he gets serious. And so only being restricted to essentially the first half of the story's version of him, which is this playful, laid-back dude, is cool because I still like that personality. I still like that person. But the reason why he jumped up to one of my favorite characters in all of Bleach for me personally, it's really locked behind that second half of the story, where we see all of the bureaucracy, we see all the politics, we see all of the backstories and the history and the political intrigue that has affected his character and that he has to fight against, and he does fight against. And it brings out the darker sides and tones of him. So I want to be able to cosplay as that, even if it's just a 10-second cutscene when I do a Keycon move. And I think that the fan base deserves that much from Bandai, and Bandai can spare that much for Bleach to give, at the very least, different cutscenes for Shunsui, Soifon, Uryu, Yoruichi for her Raijin Senkei cat form, Urahara for his Bankai, Mayuri for his modified Bankai. Same things for Toshiro, Komuro, and everyone else in new skin only tier. Okay, lightning round for B, C, and D tier. B tier, we have Grimmy, Build-A-Bear character. Devs can do whatever they want. They can make him a public character, and I think that'd be perfectly fine. I just think Grimmy is cool, and I think the lore behind Grimmy is cool. I feel somewhat similar about Bazby for different reasons, because Bazby is a really, really compelling character, actually. I really like his ability. He has like 4 different stages of, I guess, like activation and excitement. And that really, really easily translates to some gamified, form, where it's like you can kind of like Yamamoto, or maybe like probably closer to Halibo and Toshiro in game currently, where they have, the more that they use their moves, the stronger that their moves get, and so on. He gets heated up, right? He gets excited, and he gets stronger by doing so. Really clear, really easy to me. It's just giving Tyr, Halibo a different coat of paint. This would be Halibo, but probably more ranged, maybe mid-range specifically, and fire instead of water. That sounds fun to me. Different Yamamoto, kind of Yamamoto that doesn't have to I don't have to worry about burning myself out. That's something that I think I can enjoy. Kensei, he's a fan favorite for me. Not a favorite character. I just really, really love his ability, his design, and the layers to his design. We have just a white-haired character. We don't have too many of those in this show, but he's one of the lesser explored characters, both in terms of being white-haired and just backstory and personality-wise. He was a captain a long time ago, and so is implied to be really strong. We see that not really amount to much in TYBW, unfortunately, but I still think his Zanpakuto is really, really cool. And again, he's one of the more melee-focused characters. He's kind of the only boxer aside from Yasuko Sado, Chad. And yeah, I think that's underexplored, and I'd love to play as a boxer with a knife, I guess, dude, with wind powers, which we also don't see very much of outside of Yoruichi. Being able to play as a faithfully represented fighting game character feels just about as good as getting a side novel on that character for me, because there's similar levels of, I guess, dopamine and engagement for my brain, except I guess the fighting game lasts longer. So Nanao, I always thought she was really cool. She's supposed to be one of the best in all Soul Society in terms of Kido. We could see a character who just dominates mid to long range with barriers, counters, keep away, traps. She has all the justification, the most justification in terms of all the characters in the game so far, I think. Maybe outside of Aizen, because he does use a lot of Kido canonically. She has probably the most justification to exclusively fight with energy-based attacks. That's pretty cool to me. Rukia is here specifically for her Bankai. This could have been a skin, new skin only, again, different cutscene, but I think that there's enough material in the anime and the manga to justify new moves, new frames, and animations, yada yada yada, and a new cutscene. C tier. So we have Tenjiro and Robert. Tenjiro at the top, Robert at the bottom. Robert, I don't know, I like Robert. He's cool. He's a little pixie dude, and he got a lig in on Shinsui. That's a really big deal to me. I know he was like, oh, I need to get serious now, but like, nah, quick plan. Like, you got hoed. That's your own fault. But also, like, he did that. Robert did that. Tenjiro just never had much of it. It's never really impactful for me. I think his moveset's really cool, and I like that he's like rumored to be the fastest in all of Soul Society, but like, I don't really feel like we get to see very much of that. And then speed is also really funny because it's relative to your overall spiritual pressure anyway. So although he might be like the fastest in terms of raw capability and like raw technique, he still like technically gets outsped by Aizen, Ichigo, and Juha by the end of the story at the very least anyway. So I'm not really big on him. Askin is hilarious, and I think that he deserves to be in DLC too, just because he's just has so much staying power in the story. He fights like multiple different people and has a really wide arsenal of tricks and tools. And like, he's not my favorite character per se, even though I really like the more of the spotlight they've given him in the anime. He's just not my cup of tea, but he is really cool. He's really, really fun. It's really fun. I think just because of how much time he gets in the narrative to exist close to the main action and just have interactions with other characters, and because of how much we get to see him do, he definitely has enough material to warrant being a character in the game. And he could also just be really fun, kind of like trap-based or poison-based character. Similar to Mayuri, but instead of like him lowering your defenses through his poison, maybe Askin could literally just drain your health directly. Or your guard gauge or something else, who knows. He could be super duper technical or super duper gimmicky. He could be like Arakune from BBCF, where he is, I guess, technically both technical and gimmicky. Or he could be something else. Like, I guess all poison characters are kind of typically really, really technical, or more complicated than not. Anyway, Nemu. Nemu's really cool. She goes Super Saiyan. That'll be fun to see. Is it worth seeing her go Super Saiyan over Quilljay? Over Renji? Definitely not. Ishin. I would definitely put Ishin a lot higher on this list, if not for the fact that I wouldn't pick Ishin or Yachiru over another character if I were to like, if Bandai put out a vote, like a poll for all characters, okay? And they said the top 4 characters that win this poll are guaranteed to be DLC, and we had every character on this list, on my tier list. Every character available for the poll. So you can only pick these characters, right? No joke characters. No characters are not in TYBW because they want to keep things, kind of like scientific or, just structurally sound. I would be sad if numbers 1, 2, and 3, and 4 were any character from B through D tier over any character from S to A tier for me personally. And I think that, although that's not the way I was thinking about this moving into it, it's definitely when I'm thinking about it now. So yeah, take that as you may, but I kind of actually hope that happens, because I think that'd be the like fairest and also coolest and most communally engaged thing that Bandai can do. I don't think they've ever done anything like that before, but it would be nice. And I think we see some really interesting choices in terms of who gets picked, and also maybe conversations that are had in the fighting game community, because it is a fighting game and we're not really known to talk about balance very bipartisanly or just very fairly and like level-headedly. I think it'd be really funny and maybe productive for the FGC to be able to or to have to undergo having those conversations. So yeah, that's about it for D tier. I wouldn't want to see anyone in D tier added to the game over A tier. I think Bambi's a fan favorite. I really don't care about her personality. I really don't. Kangdu is cool because he has like those claws, but how would he fight in a way? What about him is different from like Awakened Grimmjow fighting style wise? And what about his specific abilities, the Iron, are significant enough or different enough from Kenpachi's just super armor generally, or guard point, not super armor, and then Noitera's super armor? Nothing really. So I don't think he has anything that makes him stand out from what we already have. Same thing for BG9. Well, not for BG9. But same thing for most of the other characters in C and DJ. They just don't do things differently from other characters that I think, both in terms of warranting a unique character slot, and obviously they don't do enough in the narrative, I think, to make them more arguably more important than characters in S and A tier at the very least, for me. Kiryu Hikifune, she's cool. I think she's really cool. I like her a lot, but she's not a fighter. Not in the source material. She doesn't fight. She's a support character. She does not address anyone head on. That's unfortunate, very unfortunate, especially because she's like an older woman or a different kind of body type woman. Obviously she's old in a literal sense, but she's not like, gray hair. But she looks to be matronly. She looks to be like, maybe on Unohana's level of like, in real world terms, I'm probably in my 50s. And that's cool. We don't have that in fighting games. We are getting close to it with Chun-Li, but they're going to keep her young forever. She's on adrenochrome. I wish she fought more. And if we did, we could have... I guess she'd kind of be like Kirby from Smash Bros. She's literally cooking people. That'd be hilarious. But unfortunately, we don't have that. And it's kind of the same for Meninas, Candice, Lil Tato, and Giselle. Not as much so for Giselle. We don't see them actually fight very much. We just kind of see them lose. And the fighting they do, regardless of whether they're successful in their aims or not, they don't fight distinctly different from other characters, even only in TYBW. And so I don't think that warrants them being above anyone else. One thing I love to say about Masaki is that she is a Quincy, but we see her fight really up close, and it'd be really cool to have her as a character just like canonically. But then again, why would the developers pick her over, say, for instance, Lily Barrow? Both Quincy's, both using projectiles, right? But Lily's going to do his projectile-based things much, much differently from anyone else in the roster, including Masaki in the source material, right? Uryu uses a bow and arrow. Masaki uses a bow and arrow. Masaki uses things up close, but Lily is going to potentially do that, maybe, but he's going to use a projectile thing in infinitely more ways than Masaki would, and almost infinitely more ways than Masaki would do things differently from Uryu. So that's about it. We have Who tier, and to that I say, who? What?
Hey! What is this? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?
That's all for today. In the future, I plan to make another video discussing my 4 top picks for Rebirth of Souls 2 DLC 2 prediction. I'm not sure how that'll be, how soon that'll be, as I get the feeling that I'd like to try to make my predictions as reasonable and accurate as possible. Regardless, I'm looking forward to it and to Bandai Namco's continued support of this title. Fingers crossed. If you'd like to play around with the tier list featured in this video or even remix them into your own, the links to each are provided below the video in either a pinned comment or the video description. Talk to me in the comments about your personal future DLC wishlist and whether you vibe with my choices. I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you for watching.